Meth just made me want to die, and I didn't know how to quit. When they got to the point of explaining to us why we had these reactions, why I had to use so much more at the end than I did at the beginning, why I felt rage and anger and depression, when I finally understood that it was meth that was impacting my brain and my behavior, it really helped me want to be clean, because I understood that it wasn't me, it was the drug itself.
Sam Minsky works with the Matrix Institute on addictions.
Hi, everyone.
Here, he meets with a group in recovery.
You know, one of the big mysteries in this field is why people continue to use drugs even after it doesn't feel that good or there's really bad consequences in their lives. And, you know, I wonder why some of you started using in the first place. I'm assuming that at first it worked in some way.
I started using meth when I was 19 to mask feelings. I had a really huge blow up with my father, and I just wanted anything to numb it.
Initially, you know, I was in high school. It was the thing to do. You know, I didn't know about the rush and everything that came with it. It was party time.
The first time I used methamphetamine, I was over a friend of mine's house, this young lady, and we were drinking, and she said, "You should try this, it'll really make you feel good."
Because I heard that it was a really good way to lose weight. My friends were using it, and I had just had a baby.
I felt like I could go on for hours and hours, you know, with no fatigue or nothing. That was a good feeling.
I'm Kristen. I was a user too. I know what it's like. We all start using meth for a reason. It gives us what we want at first, but quickly backfires. Let's explore why meth makes us feel so good. One of the gifts of life is the ability to experience pleasure. When we come across something we like, a message travels to the reward center of our brain, and we experience pleasure. Our brains are finely tuned machines. Inside, cells called neurons are constantly communicating to shape how we think, feel, and act. Let's eavesdrop on their conversation. These are the ends of two neurons. The one on the right sends a message, and the one on the left receives it. At first, they look connected, but they are actually separated by a tiny space called a synapse, where messages are relayed. What we'll see next is how we normally experience pleasure. The sending neuron contains dopamine, the brain's pleasure chemical. When something good happens to us, this feel-good chemical is released into the synapse, where it connects with receptors. There, dopamine activates the receiving neuron, which in turn conveys the message onto the next neuron, creating a chain reaction that produces pleasure. After the message is sent, dopamine is recycled by transporters to be reused. This conversation repeating itself again and again gives us the feeling of pleasure. When dopamine connects with receptors, we feel good. To understand why meth is so addictive, let's think about the everyday things that give us pleasure.
There are wonderful experiences like being on stage or, you know, winning in a tennis tournament. But it's not immediate. It doesn't involve immediate gratification.
Okay, if I look at times that I've been really happy or really pleased about something, flying, going out with friends, the normal things that people derive pleasure from, I had all of those things.
On Friday nights, we would all sit around and watch TV and order pizza and stuff like that. My sisters and me and my mom, dad. So yeah, there was always good family times, you know.
When I could spend time with my kids and just being with my kids.
Singing, dancing,
go camping, and we go fishing.
Flew my hang glider off a 5,000-foot cliff.
Water skiing, water sports.
Those were highs for me.
Nothing's ever came close to the feeling of meth.
Dopamine makes us feel good, and lots of everyday things cause dopamine to flow. But meth, a synthetic, toxic substance, unnaturally raises dopamine levels. Nothing else in life leads to such a massive release of dopamine and intense surges of pleasure.
And I just figured out how to make so much money. I can get the weed today. I don't have the weed, but the point is we can get it.
Oh, so you need my car. The first time it was like being like Superman.
Flying. You feel like you're so gorgeous.
instantly happy.
Mind-blowing.
And a blast of like energy.
Kelly, this is Mac.
Hi, Mac. How you doing? I like the dress, the flowers. It really brings out the flower in you. It blings it out.
As we all know, the high comes at a price.
One of the ways that meth works is that it stimulates your brain to release all of its dopamine at once.
How does meth change our brain? When we use meth, it enters the bloodstream and travels to the reward center of the brain where it invades the sending neuron. Meth causes dopamine to unnaturally leak into the neuron, then spill into the synapse. Making matters worse, meth blocks the transporters, which recycle dopamine back into the sending neuron. This keeps levels abnormally high, overstimulating our brains. We feel a powerful wave of pleasure. The rush can last 8 to 12 hours from just one dose. This much dopamine makes us feel good, but meth overloads our brain. We can only take so much before we crash.
You think a day is gone by and, you know, a week or two has gone by and then your body just gives up on you.
It was more of a blackout. It wasn't like a sleep. I didn't dream or anything, I was just out.
I would sleep for days. I would hibernate for days at a time.
Meth causes dopamine to flood our receptors. When we stay up, taking more and more meth, we exhaust our dopamine supply. The problem is, our brains can only produce a limited amount of dopamine at once. Eventually, we feel like we're running on empty. The party's over, and what we want is more meth.
Unless I had meth, I couldn't get up the next day at all. If I slept for 10 hours, 12 hours, 16 hours, I couldn't get up.
It's almost like a little panic. What's going on? Where's my dope? You know, where's my money? Where's my stuff?
God, I feel awful. I need some dope. Oh my God, I'm sick. I gotta call my friend and see if I can find some dope because this is like just too much to bear. I can't stand it.
So meth comes into the brain, revs up the engine, and runs it at 100 miles an hour for days, using up our dopamine until our body runs out of gas and crashes. We need up to 10 days to refill our dopamine supply.
My spirit was dying inside. I needed anything to numb it and try and make me happy. And if one line made me happy, two was definitely going to make me happier. At least that's how I felt.
People don't realize this when they start, but over time, you literally change your brain chemistry. This is an unintended consequence. Did your drug use increase over time as you continued to use?
A little amount will keep me, buzzed for a while. And then later on, it was just a constantly, every 5-10 minutes, I got to that point that I was just day and night. That was my thing, just doing meth, day and night.
You start using more and more because it stops working. So you're trying to get that same effect by using more and more and more.
Our brains adapt. Less dopamine, damaged transporters, receptors that withdraw. These are the ways our brains develop tolerance to meth. The same dose doesn't produce the same effects. Of course, what we want is to get high. So we up the dose, and our brains learn to tolerate even more. And the cycle continues.
When everything in my life just came to a screeching halt and I thought that it was the end and I had nothing left, I slammed dope.
I changed methods of use. I went from snorting it to smoking it to shooting it. And I just thought it was normal to do that.
When the regular dose doesn't give us the same rush, we take more. But now when meth reaches the brain, it finds a lot less dopamine. Plus, meth has destroyed transporters. And on the receiving neuron, all that overstimulation we loved has caused receptors to withdraw. So it's just harder to get high. No matter how much meth we use, we can never recapture that first rush.
I would get high maybe just for a minute. And then it was gone.
Tolerance creates big problems. When we increase our dose, we need more money to buy more drugs. This endless search for the high caused by tolerance often gets us into trouble.
At night, I used to look outside the window and I could swear I see people in the trees, and I'd call my friends and go, hey, check it out. There's someone out there, man. There's somebody out there. My friends would tell me, you need to get some sleep.
One of the common side effects of meth use over time is paranoia or unreasonable fear. But I'd like to hear your stories about paranoia. What have you guys experienced?
Looking out of keyholes for hours and hours and hours, convinced that there were people walking by my door, hearing voices coming out of a shower head.
When we blast our brains with meth over time and go without sleep, we may experience what's called meth psychosis. We feel paranoid and afraid as meth stimulates the emotional center of the brain. We see things that aren't real as meth affects the visual cortex. And in the part of the brain that processes sound, we hear things that don't exist.
We have a more primitive part of the brain. It's known as the lower brain, the limbic system. It helps us feel appropriate sense of fear. No organism could live without being afraid when it's appropriate, because sometimes you have to flee from an enemy, you have to stand and fight, and you have to react instinctively. This part of the brain, this lower brain, is especially stimulated by methamphetamine use, by stimulant use. So now what was a natural fear response becomes an unnatural fear response when there's nothing in the environment to really be afraid of.
My paranoia was so terrible that I used to put on a bulletproof vest and a sawed-off shotgun and go outside thinking somebody was out there.
I had paranoia that I thought would never stop. I was afraid to take a shower. I was afraid to do anything. I kept thinking that everyone was in a conspiracy to kill me, regardless of where I was at. Initially, I thought it would stop after I detoxed, but it didn't.
Even after we stop using, some of us have brief flashbacks of paranoia and hallucinations. These symptoms fade as the brain heals, showing just how much meth changed our brains. This is a reminder that addiction is a brain disorder, not a moral failing.
My computer, if it misbehaved in any way, I would smash something. I probably went through a mouse every 4 or 5 weeks. Just unplug it, and you do this, bam, let it go against the wall.
We know that meth use overstimulates our emotional centers, producing powerful feelings of anger and fear, which can lead to irritability and aggression.
Kind of like how children do. That's how most people act under the influence of methamphetamine.
Is this the last one, Shelly?
When I didn't get what I wanted, I just threw a temper tantrum.
Kelly, did you finish it? Kelly!
The more meth we used, the more violent we were.
Kelly!
It got to the point where violence was an everyday occurrence.
Oh God, my kids had it bad. I'd get a belt to their butts, you know, leave me alone right now. I want to be alone. Don't talk to me. Don't call my name. I hit them with the belt for bugging me.
And I finally noticed what was going on. The police were at my house because my husband had beat me up. And I was bleeding, and I was on the floor, and there was broken stuff everywhere. And I thought, how did I get here? What's going on in my life?
Police!
When we stop using, take care of our bodies, and apply the tools we've learned in recovery, our brains also heal, and aggression quiets down.
I still experience being in a workplace and feeling like my opinion isn't being consulted, angry about the way that the world works. But now I think I have the tools, I have the resources to process them. I didn't have that before.
I reach out to my sponsor, and I also have one other close friend in my meetings that I call, because I need to let them know about the situation so that they can tell me it's okay. Let's evaluate this, and it's really not that big of a deal, and it's okay that you have those feelings.
We often enter treatment not really knowing how aggressive we were during our use. As we get sober, we remember and may feel ashamed. With meth, aggression is a result of changes to the brain. This does not excuse the hurt we cause others, but it can help us understand what was driving the behavior.
I was so angry, and I still had to finish my shift before I could leave. What I really wanted to do was take a drink and then use, because that'll numb it.
Nothing has to happen to trigger me to want to use drugs. It can be as simple as I just wake up with the feeling, or you might make me angry.
I'll just be driving, and I don't know where that thought came from. I wasn't looking at anything or hearing anything.
Craving grows as we use more meth. Here's how it works. As we've seen, meth releases a lot of dopamine, creating intense pleasure. Our brains automatically connect the people, places, and things around us with the pleasure of the high. These become our triggers. Triggers generally fall into two categories: external and internal. External triggers are the people, places, and things that we associate with our use. Internal triggers are intense emotions such as anger, hurt, desire, or fear that cause us to want to use. When we think about or come into contact with these triggers, our brains release dopamine, causing us to crave.
I think in the beginning you associate everything with meth. I mean, you really do. The music, places.
Dollar bills, CD cases, because I used to use CD cases to crush up my drugs on.
Be driving through neighborhoods where I scored drugs.
Well, for me, it's the streets. I have grown so accustomed to the streets and the lifestyle on the streets since a younger age, and I always thinking that I'm missing out something when I'm not out there.
We know that a very potent external trigger is a certain freeway exit, a certain part of town, because you went there so many times to get the drug and use the drug. And now in recovery, sometimes you drive by and it feels like the car wants to drive off by itself, or you want to get off at that bus stop. You may not even have a reason to be there, but it's the lower brain, once again, that's trying to take you back to the circumstances where you're likely to relapse and fall, because the lower brain likes being in the driver's seat.
Usually I think about meth when
I'm having a lot of problems with either my significant other or my parents. Relationships in general are very hard.
Triggers with my mom run deep, run very deep. She has my first son. It'll trigger me to get very emotional, where I want to blame, I want to lash out, I want to just do anything but be in that moment with her.
And as far as the emotional triggers go, the most important thing is to know which emotions are the most potent for you. If you know that getting angry is one of your real trigger emotion, you try to recognize the emotion and then do something else. Why give your lower brain an excuse to kind of take you back to using? Why put yourself in that situation where you might even be triggered, period?
In recovery, you got to know what your trigger traps are and what you're weak for. I know what I'm weak for. Drugs and women. I'm weak for that. I can't, I don't date girls who do drugs or even drink. We can't go out.
Part of going to treatment is identifying what your triggers are and then having a plan for avoiding the external triggers to the best of your ability, and with the emotional triggers to recognize the internal triggers so that we can take a different kind of action other than to use drugs.
It works like this. First, we get triggered, which leads to a thought about using, which can turn into craving and drive us to use. We have to stop this trigger, thought, craving process right after the thought, before it becomes a craving and gets out of control. In treatment, we learn tools to accomplish this.
I know I don't have an appointment, but it was either come here or go to a bar.
Come on back. So you found out that you don't make what you deserve. They won't even talk to you about it. And the anger triggers you to want to think about using again.
This sequence of events, trigger, thought, craving, occurs in different parts of the brain.